On November 6, 2023, something remarkable unfolded in the icy waters near Lapa Island, Norway. A group of researchers witnessed an extraordinary and tragic event involving a male orca. This particular orca was struggling, clearly in distress, and exhibiting signs that he was nearing death. Yet what made the scene especially unusual was the behavior of two other orcas nearby. These two orcas stayed close to the ailing male, holding him at the surface so he could breathe. For orcas, surfacing for air is routine. They can typically hold their breath for up to 15 minutes, but they come to the surface more frequently. However, this male was exhausted, too weak to rise on his own. Despite this, his companions refused to let him sink. For nearly an hour, they supported him, keeping him afloat, seemingly trying to prevent his demise. Their efforts were relentless, displaying a level of care that is rarely observed in the wild. Sadly, their efforts were in vain. The male orca eventually passed away, but even after his death, the two orcas did not immediately abandon him. They lingered, swimming around his body, as if unwilling to let him go. They appeared to be attempting to revive him, staying close and interacting with the lifeless body. This could very well be one of the first times such behavior has been documented in the North Atlantic. But what motivated these orcas to act this way? Were they preventing his death, or was this an emotional reaction, akin to grief, or some sort of mourning ritual? Later that day, observers from another ship reported something just as intriguing. They saw younger orcas continuing the efforts to keep the dead male at the surface. Whether these young orcas were trying to bring him back to life or simply coping with the loss of a pod member is unclear. This behavior, though remarkable, raises important questions about orca social bonds and how they deal with mortality. So how do orcas and other cetaceans typically die? The most common assumption is that when a whale or dolphin becomes too old or weak, it drowns because it can no longer reach the surface to breathe. However, there is very little evidence to support this theory. No one has ever directly observed a cetacean drowning due to natural causes. Additionally, whales and dolphins do not need to expend much energy to stay afloat, especially once they have reached adulthood. Only young calves who have not yet developed enough body fat for buoyancy face significant challenges in staying at the surface. A more plausible explanation for the death of aging orcas is that they slowly lose the ability to hunt and catch prey. As they weaken, they become malnourished, losing the strength necessary to survive. Orcas are social animals, and in some cases they can rely on the pod to share food. In fact, there are documented cases of orcas feeding sick or disabled members of their group. One famous example involves an orca that had lost both its fins but was still supported and fed by its pod. However, this level of care is not always possible, and even in tight-knit orca families, some individuals may succumb to old age or illness. As an orca approaches the end of its life, it often becomes less active, showing little interest in food or social interaction. Eventually, when it has no strength left, it may sink into the depths without much of a struggle. The behavior of the two orcas in Norway holding their dying companion at the surface suggests a deep emotional connection. But once the male had reached the limit of his life, there was nothing they could do to save him. Male orcas typically live for about 60 years, while females can reach up to 80 years. The oldest orca on record was estimated to have lived up to 105 years, although some researchers believe this may have been an overestimate. What happens after an orca dies? Their carcasses play a crucial role in marine ecosystems. When an orca dies, its body can take decades to fully decompose, and during that time, it provides food for a wide variety of marine life. Shortly after death, decomposition begins, causing the orca's body to bloat due to gases produced by bacteria. This can cause the body to float to the surface, where it becomes an easy meal for seabirds, sharks, and other predators. Eventually, the orca's body will sink to the ocean floor, where it becomes a vital food source for scavengers such as crabs, fish, and other bottom-dwelling creatures. These animals can feed on the orca's body for up to 2 years, depending on its size. Once the flesh has been consumed, all that remains are the bones, which can take even longer to decompose. Special types of worms, known as ossidacs, are responsible for breaking down the bones. These bone-eating worms play a critical role in the decomposition process, ensuring that every part of the orca's body is eventually consumed. But orca death rituals are not limited to scavengers feasting on their remains. There are also many documented cases of orcas mourning their dead, especially mothers mourning the loss of their calves. One of the most heart-wrenching stories comes from July 2018 off the coast of Vancouver Island. A mother orca named Talequa gave birth to a calf that tragically died just minutes after being born. In a display of grief, Talequa carried the calf's lifeless body on her head for 17 days, traveling nearly 1,000 miles with the dead baby. Other orcas in her pod helped her carry the calf at times, and some scientists believe that Talequa wasn't simply mourning, but was also making a desperate attempt to save her calf by keeping it at the surface. Talequa's story is not unique. Other orca mothers have been observed carrying dead calves, although not for as long as Talequa. Orcas are known to support dying or sick pod members by keeping them afloat, allowing them to breathe as long as possible. Researchers believe this behavior is evidence of deep emotional bonds and even empathy among orcas. In some cases, orcas have been seen guarding the bodies of their dead pod members, staying with them for days after their death. These actions suggest that orcas experience emotions such as grief, similar to humans. Anthropologists like Barbara King, who study animal emotions, argue that Talequa's behavior was not just an instinctual reaction but an expression of real grief. Orcas are highly intelligent, social animals with large brains, and their complex social structures allow them to form strong bonds with one another. It is not surprising that they would feel loss and sadness when a member of their pod dies. In fact, there are many stories of orcas supporting injured or disabled members of their pods. One well-known example is Stumpy, an orca that had been severely injured by a boat propeller, losing part of its tail and dorsal fin. Despite these injuries, Stumpy survived for years thanks to the care of multiple pods that fed and protected him. These pods showed remarkable altruism, continuing to care for Stumpy even though he could no longer contribute to the group by hunting. But orca grief doesn't only flow from mother to calf. In 2024, a young orca off the coast of Vancouver Island was observed staying in a lagoon for over a month after her mother died during a seal hunt. Despite efforts by rescuers to guide her back to the ocean, the calf refused to leave the lagoon, as if mourning the loss of her mother or waiting for her return. Eventually, the young orca found her way back to the open ocean, but this incident highlights the depth of emotional connections within orca families. These stories paint a picture of orcas as creatures with rich emotional lives. They care for their sick, mourn their dead, and show empathy and compassion toward one another in ways that closely resemble human behavior. Orcas are not just the powerful predators we often think of. They are deeply social, intelligent animals capable of love, loss, and grief. In conclusion, orcas demonstrate an incredible range of emotional depth, from caring for the sick to mourning their dead. Their behaviors, whether holding a dying pod member at the surface or carrying a dead calf for days, show a profound empathy that sets them apart in the animal kingdom. Orcas, much like humans, experience the full spectrum of emotions, making their stories of life, death, and survival in the ocean all the more compelling.